5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is Chad here, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
In 1963, I was 8 years old, and I was in my backyard, and we lived in the city, so, in row houses. So we had a small backyard, and I'm looking down, and I see this perfectly circular shadow move across my feet. And I immediately looked up, and when I did, about 50 feet over my head was this beautiful flying saucer. I mean, it was breathtaking. It was a really cool event. And it wasn't just a visual either. It's like, when I looked up at it, the sounds of the neighborhood, women hanging up laundry, dogs, cats, cars, kids, noisy place. There was a distinct auditory change. It was like I put my hands against my ears. The sounds were kind of muffled.
My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
Hands against my ears. The sounds were kind of muffled. And I remember looking at it and being kind of puzzled why there wasn't an exhaust. I put together model airplanes when I was a kid, so I had some idea of how, things work that fly. And there were no rivets. It was just a sheet of shiny, like polished aluminum or something.
0, 0, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is a lawyer and former assistant attorney general, and in 1977, he became an unwilling participant to events that shaped his future in ways he never, ever would have imagined. Terry Lovelace is here. Thank you so much for joining me, sir, and welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, welcome to Montana. I know you're down in Texas, and we're kind of living in a different world right now. Have you been at home most of the time, or have you been able to get out and enjoy some of the peace and quiet of isolation on the streets, I guess?
Well, you know what? It's almost business as usual here. Not quite. But no, I haven't been out much. My backyard is about it. I have a healthy respect for the virus, so.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do too. And I've been making a lot of excuses not to be out in my yard and making it look better and at least improving something out there, but that's coming right up. So it's really hard to decide what to do on a day-to-day basis, even when you have a lot of free time.
I don't even know what day it is anymore. It runs on.
I know. I've heard that question, or I've heard that statement from a lot of people, and it's pretty funny. So do you still get out and do a little running? I know you were a runner.
I don't, but I get out and walk. I try to do 1.5 miles a day. So I have, in back of my property, there's some trails, and I can go back there, not see a soul, do 1.5 miles, and get back to the house.
I used to run a lot. I had a little heart surgery back in 2005, and as an excuse, 2 weeks later, I was out, and I probably ran every day and entered races and did all kinds of things for about 10 years, and quit the racing part, but I still try to move a little bit from time to time.
Yeah, I miss it. I miss running.
So tell me this story. You were out, you weren't running, but you knew of a spot on your leg that basically you had a numb spot, and prior to that feeling of numbness, you didn't have any symptoms at all of any part of your leg being abnormal, correct?
None. Just that spot that would go numb. Like I say, about every time I would hit the 2 mile mark in my run, I didn't run, marathons. I ran, 3-4 miles a day, but I ran almost every day. And man, like clockwork, that spot would go numb right on my leg. I could take a pin and delineate the outline of it. It was about the size of a $50 or a toonie, and it was perfectly round. And I talked to a doctor about it, and she said, it's a histemic reaction, probably from the stress of running. She said I wouldn't worry about it, so I didn't.
Any other symptoms? Did you ever feel muscle spasms or anything like that, or did your running performance suffer because of it? No,
I don't think so. It's just something that would happen, and I would anticipate it. I knew it was going to happen, and it didn't interfere. It never interfered with my run. So,
interesting.
Live with it, yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the event that led up to the doctor's visit or the hospital visit?
Oh my gosh, I retired from the state of Vermont in January of 2012. And in October of that year, we moved down to Dallas because this is where our children and grandchildren are. And I got up one morning in October 25th, 2012, and I couldn't put weight on my right leg. It wouldn't bear any weight. And it was painful. And I told my wife, I got to get an x-ray. So I get all my medical care from the VA. So she took me to the emergency room. And a couple hours later, they x-rayed my leg, and the lady was kind of the technician was kind of confused. She came out, she took another set of x-rays, then she came out and took a third set of x-rays. Then she asked me, she says, "Have you been in an automobile accident or suffer a shrapnel wound?" Or I'm like, no, I never left the States, and not been in a car accident, and I never injured that leg other than skinned knee as a kid. And she says, "Well, you have some very unusual foreign bodies in your leg." And I said, "Oh, look, can I see them? They're my x-rays." And, you don't need a medical degree to see them. And when I saw the one of my right leg, I recognized that spot above my knee, right where that thing sat, as the spot that would go numb. And, seeing those, and then below my knee, there's that like a floret pattern of like Tic Tac type things. So what
was that? I mean, I noticed that on your website. Now I'll put links, of course, to your website. But what is that pattern to the right of your? I'm not sure what I'm looking at there.
That's in the calf of my leg, the calf of my right leg, and it's an arrangement. The radiologist came down to look at my x-ray, and he looked at my x-ray, and he insisted on examining my knee. He says, "You got to have a scar there." He says, "These things can't get under your skin and into your fascia and tissue like this without there being a scar." And I said, "Doc, I don't have a scar." And he says, "Oh, sure you do. You probably just forgot, whatever." He asked me to take off my pants, and he examined my knee. And he was stunned. He was, genuinely stunned. And I said, "Well, doctor, how often is it you find a foreign body like this and there not be a corresponding scar?" And he said, "Never." He said, "I've been a radiologist 23 years. I've never seen this." And in regard to that floret pattern in the calf muscle of my leg, he said that it's kind of odd the way he said it. He said, "On x-ray film, I can tell that these things are the same density as bone tissue." And then he said, "But I think not." And I'm like, "What do you mean you think not?" And he said, "Well, number one, I've never seen bone tissue sprout in the middle of a muscle before." And he said, "I've certainly never seen it arrange itself in a symmetrical pattern like this." He said, "That's just strange." He said, "You have a very strange knee, my young man."
So the other picture that I'm looking at is that implant, is it actually square, and those are wires running totally vertical up from that?
Correct. About the size of a fingernail.
Wow.
with 2 wires running vertically. What I did was I took some better pictures of it, and I got a friend, a guy I went to law school with, who's works for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Actually, he just retired. And they have on file the world's largest database of electronic equipment. I mean, they've got every transistor, resistor, every electrical component you can think of, they have cataloged. And they use that. That came about after the Lockerbie, Scotland plane went down.
Right.
So they've got everything. If it's made for electronics, they've got a record of it, a database. And whatever was in my knee is not in their database.
So you cross-reference that to size, shape, or all of the above?
All of the above, yeah.
Huh. That's very, very interesting. So what was your next step after that? I mean, obviously it's quite a shock to go see somebody, a medical doctor, and have him tell you that there's a piece of something in your leg. We have no idea what it is, how it got there. What was your feeling then, and what was that like?
Well, it was jarring. It really was. It was like a slap in the face. I was stunned. I mean, it was validation for what I knew. I mean, the thought that these things put their hands on me back in 1977 just brought back a whole lot of bad memories. And, 1977, this whole abduction event was, a huge event in my life. I mean, I tend to think of my life pre-1977, as maybe innocent and childlike maybe. And man, I left Devil's Den State Park an adult.
So in 1977, you were 22 years old and you were a staff sergeant with the United States Air Force. What was your function then? What was your job, and was it related in any way to the AFOSI or what were you doing back then?
Actually, I was an enlisted guy. I went in the military to get the GI Bill so I could go, get a college education. I served as a medic and an EMT. And I worked at Whiteman Air Force Base. I worked at the emergency room there. And I worked several years with my friend, Toby. And we worked the night shift, 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. And if there was, a car accident, a heart attack, a plane crash, we were first responders. And we worked the night shift. I worked the night shift. I was taking some classes, and it just fit my schedule really well. And my friend Toby wanted to work the night shift because he was just, ate up with the idea of looking at the night sky. I mean, he knew all the constellations. He could tell me when a satellite was about to come over, and there weren't that many satellites up there in 1977.
No. I have several podcasts, and I mentioned that exact same thing because, now you can go look at the night sky and see satellites nonstop. You can go to sites that'll tell you exactly where to look and when. But back then, you may see one or two in a night. And I'm talking like if my friends and I slept outside when I was a kid, for 4 hours, you'd look up and maybe see 2 satellites when now it's hard not to see a satellite.
It is, yes. Yeah. So, yeah, you know what? I wish that I'd had time to connect with Toby and find out where his fascination with the night sky came from. My guess would be that he probably had some kind of childhood misadventure like I had.
Do you think so what was the youngest recollection you have of some unnamed event that you can or cannot describe, something real strange that happened as a kid? Did you have any?
I did. In 1963, I was 8 years old, and I was in my backyard, and I'm playing with this. An uncle gave me an adult bow and arrow set. Like you could hunt with it. Not anything I'd give my kids. At 8 years old. And we lived in the city, so in row houses. So we had a small backyard. I had a bale of hay set up, and I'm shooting these arrows into this bale of hay. And I'm looking down, and I'm loading an arrow into the notch of the string and the notch of the bow, and I see this perfectly circular shadow move across my feet. And I immediately looked up, and when I did, about 50 feet over my head was this beautiful flying saucer. I mean, it was breathtaking. It was a really cool event. And it wasn't just a visual either. It's like when I looked up at it, the sounds of the neighborhood, women hanging up laundry, dogs, cats, cars, the kids, noisy place. There was a distinct auditory change. It was like I put my hands against my ears. The sounds were kind of muffled. And I remember looking at it and being kind of puzzled why there wasn't an exhaust. I put together model airplanes when I was a kid, so I had some idea of how, things work that fly. And there were no rivets. It was just a sheet of shiny, like polished aluminum or something. But it was breathtaking. I thought, I thought the word sexy really wasn't in my vocabulary at 8. I forget the word I used, but it was it was cool in a way like a new Alfa Romero is on a showroom floor. If that makes sense.
Any idea how big this was?
Maybe 30, 40 feet.
Wow.
Big.
Yeah.
Big. But relatively short encounter, I think. I didn't have a watch on. I had this strange compulsion to lie down in the grass and look up at it, thinking I could get a better view. But, that makes no sense. It really doesn't. And
so basically it put you at ease, but did you have any feeling of like numbness or indifference to it? Or was there a curiosity and any pleasurable feeling associated with it?
Curiosity and excitement.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really a moment, and I watched the thing, and it wobbled in the breeze just a bit, and it kind of listed the starboard, so at an angle it would clear the power lines and shot off. I mean, like 0 to 500 miles an hour, and it's gone. And I'm screaming, "Mom!" She comes running. She thinks I shot somebody in the head with an arrow or something. She comes out, checks me for blood, sees me on the ground. And I said, "Mom, did you see it? It was really cool. Did you see it, Mom?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Mom, I saw a flying saucer." And, she's like, "No, you can't say that. You don't say that." She dragged me in the house and she said, "Terry, you saw a jet. You did not see a flying saucer. And you can't tell people you saw a flying saucer because they'll think there's something wrong with you. They'll think there's something wrong with us, Different time, 1963.
I still think, though, back in 1963, a kid could get away with, seeing a flying saucer too before the age of like 16. Do you think that she was worried about neighbors knowing, or do you think that possibly there was a connection and maybe the parents had experiences themselves?
I think my parents had experiences, particularly my father. I don't know about my mother, but my father for sure. He was just, anytime anything came on the television or radio regarding a UFO, he would just tune into it and ate it up. And I asked him, I said, "Dad, where do those things come from?" And he says, "Don't worry about it. That's from the Russians. That's from the Soviet Union." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And, I was a pretty smart kid, even at 8. And I'm thinking, then why doesn't it say CCCP on that? Why is it just this circular perfect disc? It makes no sense. So, but he gave me the slow talk. He's my mom, He says, "Look, you can't go telling people you saw a flying saucer. They'll think you're crazy." And so I didn't. I mean, my family knew that I saw this thing, and I hope that they believed me. I'm not sure. I mean, I wasn't the kind of kid to make stuff up. I was a pretty straight kid.
I often look back, when I was, when I was that age, and the experiences that I had, I often wondered, and I had sort of the same reaction with my parents. I'd told my mother about one of the incidents and what I saw. And she seemed to completely steer me into a totally different direction, and one that I wouldn't even have expected. So when I thought about that, I thought, well, maybe she's worried about me. Maybe she's worried I'm crazy. Maybe she's been through the same thing and doesn't want me to worry about that. And then I kind of came to this conclusion that maybe she had an experience and didn't want me to worry about it because she had some insight and maybe knew a lot more about that than I did. But, I thought, well, maybe when I'm older, I'll figure that out and I'll have more experiences and I'll know more. But I don't think I know much more. So I still wonder, and never ever had that conversation again. I probably still could, but there's something about that mystery that's attractive to me. So I don't go there. So yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask how old you were?
So when first thing that I really noticed when I had my tonsils out, when I had an experience when I was maybe 5-ish, and then a couple experiences like 7 and 8 years old, like 11 years old. And then of course there's a biggie at like 16 and 20-ish. And so, quite frequently. And I don't know if you probably haven't listened to my podcast, but I just had, last night I had two of my best friends from high school, my very best friends. And we were, experienced something pretty amazing together at the same time that they have absolutely no memory of. So we got together and we talked about that for the first time in, 30 some years.
That's not unusual, I hear.
Yeah, it's really, I have a very vivid memory, but they absolutely have none. And, and we had never talked about it. I think they had an idea that something unusual happened because part of the evening they don't have any memory of at all. We messed around, drove around, and then, getting home and later on in the night, they have no recollection whatsoever.
Yeah. What was odd was when I published my book in 2018, I gave a copy to my sister, and she's 76. And I said, why don't you read this? And she's like, no, I don't want to read that. And I'm like, well, I talk about, when I was 8 and all this stuff. And she was visibly upset, and she says, I do remember when there were funny lights coming through the windows, and sometimes you wouldn't be in bed. And we felt bad we couldn't be of more help to you. Because I had 2 sisters right across the hall from my bedroom. And then she said, that's all. I don't want to talk about this.
Right.
And I found out that's not uncommon. I put a email address in the back of my book and said, look, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but if you've had an experience and want to share it with me, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Well, in 25 months, I've received 1,283 emails as of this morning.
Wow.
And I had several, a couple hundred, where people tell me that they witnessed something with a family member or close friends. And when the event was over, it was like, well, okay, that's it. And they continued on like nothing happened. And there was never any debriefing or did you see that or nothing of the sorts.
Amazing. I have a younger brother who, I actually thought it'd be a great idea to have the 2 friends on. And I thought it would be cool to have my younger brother who will talk about anything, except now he doesn't really want to talk about this. So he used to tell me that he remembers as a little kid, very little, maybe as young as the age of 3, these little gray guys with big eyes used to take him out of bed and then bring him outside and then just leave him out in the yard, and then he'd be locked outside and he'd have to bang on the door to get back in the house. I do recall once that he was outside, in the middle of the night banging on the door. And so, I would have liked to hear that, and maybe I will, but, I don't think it's one of those things you want to really push because people kind of do that in their own time. And I think, with your sister, that's, to me, that makes me wonder what kind of a time that she had or what memories she had, because honestly, my memories aren't that great, and I don't really want to think about it for the most part. But a lot of it was terrifying. So I'm wondering if, some people have in the same family have good experiences and other bad. And if that is true, I'm wondering why that is.
I think they have some kind of control over us as far as our memory, our recollection. I think that they can wire our brains to feel guilty, and I didn't want to talk about it until I had that X-ray. That was kind of a watershed moment. And I was retired. I mean, I could never have come out when I was a civil servant and published this or told the story, or even when I was in private practice. I mean, I'd have been, it wouldn't have went well. So, but now I'm retired. I don't care. And it was surprising. Some of my friends were supportive in the legal community, and some were not. Some were like, "Have you lost your mind? What are you talking about?"
Right.
And I found out who my friends were, pretty quickly.
Isn't it interesting though that some people just jump on it and they embrace it, and but then again, you don't know why. It's not like they just come out and say they're a believer, or they come out and say the same thing happened to them. But some people just are really interested in it. It doesn't change a thing. Like my two buddies. I mean, after we had the conversation, put it on tape, they really didn't have anything else to ask me, and I thought there'd be loads and loads of questions, and there weren't. And, but they were totally accepting, and I know they believe it 100%. And, but it just doesn't seem like they're interested in going beyond that. And, I don't wrong them for that in any stretch, but, I think that it seems to me that everybody has kind of a different experience. I'm wondering if they have different roles, or if it's our own personality that's so deep that comes out only in those cases.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd like to know. It's liberating to come out and talk about it. It's been very cathartic to have written it all down and told people about it. I did have other childhood experiences, but they were strange. They weren't seeing flying saucers. I had these 2-foot tall monkeys. And I know this sounds crazy, but they looked just like circus monkeys. And they would come into my room every once a week, or come sometimes 4 or 5 times in a week. And sometimes I went with them voluntarily. The one closest to my head would always hold out this monkey paw in my direction and say, "Terry, why don't you come with us? We'll bring you back home. We'll have fun." And I think sometimes I went and sometimes I didn't. One of the nightmares that I've had for 40 years that's kind of disturbing is I'm a kid again, and I'm lying in bed, and they're there. And the monkey closest to my head reaches out, only it's not a monkey's paw. It's these 4 long, ugly fingers. And for some reason, that just flips me out, and I'm awake, and I got to turn a light on, and sometimes get up and watch TV, because I'm not going to be going right back to sleep after that.
I had a conversation with several people, and I kind of threw this at them. In my experience, I saw these grays showing my best friend's objects. And I knew that they were being shown these objects because these aliens had no idea or no understanding why we as people had so many possessions, that we cherish. Every kid has toys, and every adult has their toys, and we have all these things. Whereas, you have this civilization in the sky that they don't own anything individually, and basically it was my impression that their number one reason for being and doing what they do is a perpetuation of their species. So to me, I always wonder, with the monkeys and things like in situations like that, if that was the purpose, to show you something different and see your reaction, because yes, they see people with actual monkeys. They see monkeys, and they maybe don't see a difference between us and monkeys, but maybe they want to see if we interact, or who knows. I mean, it's just there's such a little understanding of what we do from them, I believe, that nothing would surprise me, Terry.
Well, in these letters that I've got, these emails that I've received, and I've corresponded with some of these people. I've talked to some of them by phone. People told me they've seen owls and orbs of light and raccoons and no monkeys, but I think these things, even Disney characters. One lady said she saw Disney characters in her room when she was a little child. I think they take on a benign appearance so they don't scare the kid to death, And I think that's what they do. I think they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, because I do think, they are frightening. And if you see like me waking up with there's a 6-foot alien standing at the foot of my bed, and we look at each other for the next 3 hours. To me, I wonder what that purpose would serve, and why that happened, and why didn't I have good experiences like some people did. So, I mean, and yeah, talking about it, you're absolutely right. And it is liberating. And that's one of the purposes that I do this, because it just makes me feel so much healthier and more relaxed about things in life that kind of put them on the back burner, and things that don't matter. But things like that are life changers.
They really are. I'm so glad I put that email address in the back of my book, because I've really been touched by some of these letters from people. I mean, they're about 800 of the 1,200, a good portion of them all start off. It's weird. They all start off with almost the same paragraph, almost the same wording. It'll be the first paragraph will be something like, "Now, please don't think I'm crazy, or you're going to think I'm nuts, or I swear to God, this is true. I wasn't drinking or doing drugs when I saw this." They started off with some kind of disclaimer, and then they tell these amazing stories. Some of them are just like, whew. And then at the end, they're saying, it's nice to have someone to share this with finally. So,
do you ever withhold any information just because you can compare notes with other people later on? Because, for example, I saw something, and I don't explain what it was, but there was a situation where there's an alien there, and there's something very specific that it had, and I don't divulge that only because I want to see if somebody comes up with that same unusual thing. And shares that with me. And it actually happened. And it was via email with somebody who contacted me and said, I want to ask you a question. Did you see this? And I was like, wow, I certainly did. That blew my mind, to have something that specific brought to my attention that paralleled this guy's same experience.
Yeah, that's crazy. And was he, just curious, did he live geographically close to where you lived?
No, not at all. I mean, there's not a lot of people up here that I've, especially from Montana, that I've ever talked to. They're scattered throughout the world. But what I do find in common, Terry, is a lot of people. I'm 54 years old, and a lot of people with the exact same age, the exact same age as me, had experiences, or they had an experience back in 1977 or 1984,
Yeah.
Specific years that I did as well, that I only recently came out with.
Yeah. That is amazing. Yeah, I've talked to more than one person who saw something in 1977. In Dave Marler's book, David Marler wrote the book on triangular shaped UFOs, and it's almost like a work, an educational paper or something. It has an academic ring to it, because he did his homework and he investigated these cases. And in 1977, he documented this woman traveling to Kansas City, and it was in the fall, just a couple months after this happened to us, and not far from Whiteman Air Force Base, maybe 15 miles, she saw this giant triangle, that matched the description of what I saw. So
interesting. I think one of the most important discoveries I made is discoveries from other people, and I'm sure it's going to be the same with you. But I've talked to different people like Bruce Cornett, who told me about this reverse Doppler sound that he's heard from aircraft, and I know that back when I was a kid, there were other times that I had experiences with something that I couldn't really identify that was really, really odd. That I just attributed that to aircraft, and one in particular was I was out playing basketball all by myself, and this is out on the prairie in the middle of nowhere, and I was at the school, which it was closed for the summer, and just me playing basketball out there, and literally I heard what sounded exactly to me like if somehow an aircraft, a big jet, could have gears and it put it into reverse accidentally, and this horrible sound and this loud sound, it just from no sound at all, and all of a sudden I'm listening to this, and I look up, and what I thought I saw was we used to have a lot of B-52s fly over because we were north of a big Air Force base. And
why not?
Maelstrom, North Dakota, or Maelstrom, Montana, by Great Falls. But anyway, they would fly over, and what it looked to me is like one of those with another aircraft on top of it, and which really would have been much bigger and stuck out on each side. And I thought, well, they must be refueling. And what I'm hearing is two different aircrafts at the same time, and just playing tricks on my ears, but it was just a highly unusual thing. And later on, thinking about it, it wouldn't have looked like that and wouldn't have sounded like that. So, there were things that happened out there, and I think, definitely there are hot spots in the United States and elsewhere in the world that there's more activity than anywhere else, and there's probably a reason for that, but I really couldn't identify what that reason would be.
Yeah. Robert Hastings is a friend of mine, and he wrote that book, UFOs, Nukes and UFOs, some 15 years ago or so. And he talked to a lot of people from Malmstrom. In his book, he talked to like security police people, people that worked in the missile squadrons, all kinds of active duty people. And he talked about how Air Force bases in particular and nuclear power plants are kind of magnets for these things.
Nuclear missile silos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. I last night I had a Bob Salas on the podcast, and he worked at a nuclear missile site, and it's interesting to hear that they had activity there, and it was verified through the Freedom of Information Act that it really happened. And so, something unusual like that, if it is so unusual, and they made a record of it, and they had accounts of it, and they did investigations, and odd things happened to these nuclear missile silos, what could it be? And of course, there was never any indication that they came up with anything else. There was no reason for it happening. They couldn't figure out the reason, but there were these big red lights floating over this base, and it's crazy. Yeah.
He's such a credible man. He really is.
Oh, and he's just stoic. I mean, you couldn't you couldn't bend anything out of him if you wanted to. I mean, it's quite a story.
He came out, I do believe, and made a public statement that he had an abduction experience too.
Yeah, so he had experiences earlier. Describe. I've never been there, and I've been to Northwest Arkansas, but I've never been to Devil's Den. What's that like, and what's the topography like, and is it an isolated place?
It is. Well, 1977, it was very isolated. It's still isolated now, but it's a beautiful park. It really is. Lots of limestone outcroppings, lots of trees. it was just a beautiful place. And when I sat down and started writing this book, I thought, I don't know anything about Devil's Den other than my negative experience. And I kind of did the thing like David Paulides does, where I tried to get information from the Park Service, from the Department of Parks and Recreation in Arkansas and Little Rock. And they wouldn't help me. I said, can you tell me how many people have gone missing? No, we can't tell you that. We don't know. Don't have records. You want to send in a written request? We'll see if we can do something for you. And they never did. So I did a search, and I found a reference out of the Pittsburgh Press, dated 1946. And I don't remember the exact date. It was June or July. And if you want to look it up, you can pull up the Pittsburgh Press and do a search under Catherine with a K, Van, V-A-N, Alst, 2 words, Van Alst. A-L-S-T is the second part, Van Alst. When she was 8 years old, her family took a drive from Philadelphia, or Pittsburgh rather, and they were headed to El Paso, Texas to visit some relatives. And on the way, they stayed at these campsites. And on their way, they decided to stay at Devil's Den. So they had, picnic tables set up, and, they had a little place for people with campers and RVs that was, popular back then. And her mother was setting the table for breakfast, and she and her 2 brothers were running around and around the camper, like kids will do. And the 2 boys came around and popped around, and there was no Catherine. And Mom says, "Boys, where's your sister?" And they're like, "Well, she was right here, And, and she's kind of annoyed. She says, "Go find your sister." So they think, well, let's check the restrooms, and they're calling out her name. And then they're kind of getting panicked, and they say, "Mom, we can't find her." So Dad gets up. He was asleep. He gets up. He gets involved. Several of the other campers think, well, she's an 8-year-old in a bathing suit with flip-flops. She can't have gone very far. So everyone joined and pitched in, tried to help find this girl. So we're all walking around yelling Catherine through the woods. Park rangers get involved. And by nightfall, the family's really upset, obviously, and the park rangers are organizing a big search. So it was a big search, and the search lasted for 7 days and 6 nights. The 7th day, it was the last day. It was going to transition from a rescue to a recovery at the end of that day. And in that afternoon of the 7th day, there was a volunteer. There were a bunch of volunteers there from a local university. And this guy in the newspaper article is referred to as Chadwick. And I tried to look him up. I don't know if Chadwick is a first name or a last name, but that's all they said. Arkansas State student by the name of Chadwick was calling her name. And this was in an area that had been searched before. And it was also in an area with an elevation of like 800 feet from their campsite. And she would have had to walk, miles in a crisscross pattern to reach the top of the summit of this thing. And he calls her name, and she comes out from like a outcropping of rocks, ducks her head out and says, "Here I am." And, he's ecstatic. He goes over and picks her up. "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." So he gets her down to the campsite. Everybody's celebrating, and her hair was clean. Other than a couple bug bites, she wasn't any worse for the wear. She hadn't lost any weight. She was well hydrated, despite the fact there was no potable water anywhere, where she was found. And the Pittsburgh Press article says that the mother described her daughter's demeanor as being calm and serene. And I thought, that's calm is one word, but serene is kind of an odd word, I'd love to have talked to this woman. I tried to locate her, but, there's a million Van Alst, and, she may be elderly by now. So, I wasn't successful.
So that's it. There was no other account of what happened, or she didn't know.
She had no idea. She said, I couldn't tell you where I've been. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Her experience, David Paulides wrote in his fourth book, Missing 411, is called The Devil is in the Details. And the whole book is devoted to state, federal parks and land that has the name Devil in it. Devil or Diablo, and there's a ton of them, Yeah. He did Catherine Van Alst's story as well in his book. But yeah, there's like Devil's Lake, Devil's Glade, Devil's Tower, obviously, Devil's, it's common. And a disproportionate amount of people go missing from places that have the name Devil in it. And that was his observation, not mine. And he just mentioned it as, because he's a very, he takes the facts and doesn't try to make an interpretation from them, presents the facts to you, lets you draw your own conclusion.
So were these, when you went camping in 1977 in June, were these established campgrounds? Were you at a campground with other people, or were you out alone away from civilization?
This was my buddy. It was Tobias's idea that we take this trip, But I had a new camera. You really can't use a camera on a nuclear base, and I wanted to photograph wildlife. So he kind of talked me into it, and we went. And I'm sorry, I drifted from your question. Your exact question was?
I was wondering if that was an established campsite with other people around, or you guys were just kind of isolated in your own part of the world.
Right. We made the decision. Actually, Rodney made the decision. He says, Tobias, he says, we really don't want to stay in a campground. He says, think about it. If we stay in a campground, we're going to have people on either side of us. And there's going to be children and other undesirables running all over the place. And he says, let's be real outdoorsmen. Now keep in mind, he was from Flint. I was from St. Louis, Missouri. I was 22. Toby was 23. Neither one of us had ever been camping in our lives.
Very good.
So we dodged the kiosk in the park, the place where you go and get a camping permit. And we took a road went kind of on a northwesterly path, and then it turned into a gravel road, and then finally it turned into kind of a dirt road. And there was a sign across the road with a chain that's pretty sternly worded, keep out, no admittance kind of thing. And I said, well, I guess we're going to find another place. And we could see a piece of high ground out in the distance. And that's kind of where we decided we wanted to head for. And my buddy says, hey, wait a minute. And he hops out of my car and he goes over to the post where this chain is. And what they've done is they've taken a padlock and made a noose out of it and padlocked the chain so that they could loop it over this post, drape it on a nail. So all he did was he picked up the chain, let it drop, and boom, we drove in and found our space. And we found it was awesome. We went on a steady upward grade, and then we've crested the top of this hill. And there was this absolutely gorgeous field, I call it a meadow in the book, of late blooming wildflowers and grass a little less than knee high. And it was just a gorgeous place. And we had, I think I may have sent you some Google Earth photographs of it. I was shocked. The place is still there. And, it should be overgrown with 40-year-old mature trees by now. But it's not. It's not. It's they keep it cut flat. I don't know why on earth they would do that. But it was a gorgeous place to stay. So no, we didn't stay in the campground. We were out in I called it remote camping. And, that in hindsight, none of this was accident. I think we were there for an appointment. I really do.
So you're having a great time, and it's a really nice night, and then you just look above the horizon, and what do you see?
Well, we were kicked back on these air mattresses around the bonfire, and it's 9-ish, 10-ish, somewhere around there, and we're talking and laughing and just generally having a good time. And there came a lull in our conversation. Now, this sounds cliche. It sounds like something from a movie, but I swear to God, this is true. I noticed then that the crickets, the tree frogs, all the insects that make noise had died down, and there was no noise. Because we'd been almost, we had to raise our voice to carry on a conversation earlier. And now it's dead silent. I mean, all I can hear is the campfire. And, it wasn't only silent, it was still. We'd had a breeze going on that was pleasant, and that had even stopped. And it kind of spooked me. It did. It made me feel uncomfortable. And I asked my friend, like he would know, He's like, hey, man, is this normal to be this quiet? He's like, yeah, well, we've been laughing and cutting up, so we made a lot of noise. So, yeah, they'll be back. Crickets, tree frogs, they'll come back. Just wait. So, but I'll tell you, if I'd been there by myself, I'd have left at that point. And it wasn't long after that, maybe 20 minutes. He's fixated, looking. He has his head turned to his left, and I'm to his right, and he's looking at something. And he asked me, he says, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I'm like, what lights? What are you talking about? And I had to kind of remaneuver so I could see what he was talking about because he was in the way. And on the horizon, there sat these 3 little stars, and they were in a tight little triangle, and they were too far off the ground to have been like lights from a train or a shopping center or something. Besides, we were in the middle of nowhere. We were miles from anything. And, we're talking about, well, what could this thing be? And while we're talking about it, the 3 stars rotate. They rotate like they were on an axis. And it oriented itself with the apex of the triangle pointing up. Where when we first saw it, it was kind of sideways. It had to do about a 340-degree turn to orient itself with this point of the triangle up. And about this time, I felt this calm wash over me, this sensation of just calm and, hey, everything's cool, and I wasn't afraid anymore. And we watched this thing, and it started to climb up into the night sky. And the further up that it went, the larger it got. And the 3 points of light stayed always equidistant to one another. I mean, we could tell that it was a single solid object. And it climbed to a high altitude and then began a descent. And we could tell when it started to descend that it was coming in our direction because it was getting bigger all the time. And this triangle, it was doing like somersaults where it would, the apex, the light that was pointed in the direction it was moving would tumble underneath and then come back around. So we'd see 3 lights and 2 lights. And I had the oddest thought that this thing was moving with purpose, that it wasn't just something out of control. And I don't know where that came from, but. And we could see that when it would pass a star field, the stars would blink out until the thing had passed them. So we watch this thing as it descends, and I feel in waves this sedation. And, when I was 8 years old, I was thrilled. I was, top of the world. I just thought this was the coolest experience. In this one, it was just totally different. I felt this almost disinterest. I mean, short of apathy, but more like I was an observer than a participant. Strange feeling, and I know, I don't know any better way to describe it. But like I say, all fear had left me, and it when it started to come down, we could see that it was absolutely huge. It was like the size of a Walmart.
Wow.
And curiously, it fit right inside that meadow. It covered that meadow. I remembered the meadow being horseshoe shaped, but you get a different perspective walking it on the ground than you do when you see an aerial photograph of the thing. So this thing stops about 3,000 feet over our heads. And neither one of us, there's not a word said between us. And we're watching this thing. And from the underneath of it, there came this white light. And it was a visible beam of light. And it had that quality like a high-power searchlight cutting through fog. You know what I mean? You could see this. It was cylindrical column of white light. And it, boom, popped on like someone hit a switch. And it landed right in the middle of our campfire. And we're both looking at it, and we still have nothing to say, you know. And it stays there for maybe a minute, and then it turns off, and then immediately, in its stead, there came this laser-like light that was bluish purple. Now, in 1977, I'd seen lasers on television, but I'd never seen one, you know, in real life. And this laser came from the same place, directly in the middle and the underside of the triangle. And the light would land at one spot and stay for maybe a tenth of a second, and then reappear in another place for like a tenth of a second. So in every second, this thing would move to 10 different locations. And it was all over the campsite. This thing was like it was dancing. And I remember thinking, because the light hit me in the chest twice, I remember that, and I didn't feel anything. But I had the sense that, you know, this thing's checking us out. You know, we're being scanned or something. It's definitely checking us out. And again, no fear. And that light turned off. And we sat there in the quiet for a while. And my friend Toby stood up and said, "Guess show's over." And I was sleepy. I was so sleepy. All I wanted to do was lay down and go to sleep. Now, you know, we're both used to working the night shift. So, and we were tired from the drive, but, you know, we were 22 years old, in best shape of my life. I should not have been sleepy. Where I had felt mildly sedated before. After this light went away, then I felt this, man, like someone gave me a sedative. I wanted to lay down and go to sleep. So he dragged his air mattress over and threw it in the tent and fell on top of it. And I followed suit and threw mine in, and I fell on top of it. And I was out. I mean, I was out. And the best we can figure, about 4.5 hours pass. And I wake up because there are these flashing lights that are very intense, and they're yellow and white and greenish. And when they weren't flashing at a predictable interval, they were just now and then flashing. And when they were incredibly bright, when they would flash, it would light up the whole inside of the tent. And I wake up, but I don't have my wits about me. I'm kind of confused. I'm thinking, well, oh yeah, I'm camping. That's right. And in my mind's eye, I'm thinking these lights must be the overhead lights of a park ranger's truck, you know, here to kick us out or something. And I looked down at my feet, and my boots were untied, unlaced. And I thought, how did that happen? Because I didn't do that. And I took them off, and before I put them back on, I noticed my socks were on sideways. And I thought, now, I know I didn't do that. I mean, you know, they teach you to take care of your feet when you're in the military. So, you know, I took my socks off, put them on correctly. And I still don't know what's going on. You know, I lace up my boots, and then I'm looking over at my buddy Toby, who's on his knees, and he's peeking out of the tent through this flap. And in one of these flashes of bright light, I could see he'd been crying. I could see tracks of tears that lit up down the right side of his face. And that scared me. And it was at that moment that all this calm, you know, disinterest, all this, that all left. That was all gone. Now I was terrified because I couldn't imagine what would make this guy cry. And I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers out there? What's out there? And he kind of told me to be quiet. And I pull my flap of the tent back and I look out. I'm scared. And I see, well, there were two things. This thing that when we went to bed was 3,000 feet over our heads has now descended. And it's now just about 30 feet over that meadow. And we could get a real feel for the size of the thing. And it was intimidating. And then I saw what I first took to be children, about maybe 12 or 15 of them. And I could see them, especially when the lights on the corner of the triangle would flash. It would light up the whole meadow, and I could see them. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? What? And he says, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. He says, they took us and they hurt us. Don't you remember? And I did. I did have. Now, I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to us. But when he said that, I did have bits and pieces of memory of being inside this thing. And we were both terrified. And we watched them for, I don't know, half an hour maybe. And then from underneath this triangle again, and again, it's only 30 feet over the meadow, this white light comes back on. It has the same visible white quality as that light that landed in our campfire. But it's about maybe 25 feet in diameter. And it's definitely a column. And these little guys, I could tell he was right. They were not human beings. Their heads were disproportionately large. They had spindly bodies. I mean, just typical, you know? And they walk with a really distinctive gait. They walked like their knees weren't, like their knees could go backward as well as forward. They walked, they were just awkward. It was a strange gait. I mean, or like they had sore feet or something. I don't know. But they didn't walk in the way that you and I take a walk. And these guys would go over into this column of light in 2s and 3s and dissolve.
Wow.
And we watched them until the last pair stepped into the light, and they dissolved into the light. As soon as they were gone, like someone hit a switch, the light was off. And while we're watching, the colored lights that were flashing on the points of the triangle shifted to all white. And we saw the thing take off. And I mean, it didn't take off like a rocket. I mean, it just lifted off like a hot air balloon. And it went up slowly. And I remember thinking, you know, these lights, there was like a light bar, and there was a beam of light that would move up and down that light bar on the point of each leg of the triangle, right at the point. And I remember thinking to myself, that's what gives the illusion of a twinkling star when it's in the air. And I was right, because as it climbed higher, it took on the look of 3 stars traveling together, but they twinkled in the sky, which I thought was interesting. And we watched it till it was one light and then gone. And we sat there, and you know, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but all I had over my head was canvas. But I was terrified of the idea of leaving the tent. I didn't want to leave the tent. I felt like I'd be vulnerable running to the car. And to this day, I don't feel comfortable walking across open spaces. I mean, I'll walk a mile around rather than cut across an open field, because I still feel vulnerable from it. And when it was gone, my friend Toby said, well, you know, man, we got to get out of here. And I grabbed my keys. I had my wallet. I checked, and he grabbed this flashlight. And we ran to the car, started it up, and we left everything we had there. We left our food, our cooler, the tent. Toby left a backpack with a camera in it, and all this personal stuff. We left everything and hopped in our car and drove out of there. And we were hurting. This is a little before sunup, and I'm driving as fast as I can and try to not get pulled over. And got out of the park, hit blacktop, you know, hit pavement again, and pointed my car north, and just started driving. And whatever they did to me, they must have given my friend a double dose, because he was really in a lot of pain. And I had this big bench seat in my old Chevy, and he was curled up into a ball. He wasn't a big guy anyway, and he's curled into this ball. And that's it. We didn't have a discussion. We noticed that as soon as the sun came up, our eyes hurt. Our eyes were really, really sensitive to the sunlight. And when we got back to the base, we were both married. I'm still married, so my wife remembers this well. She took me to the hospital, and Toby's wife took him to the hospital. And I had this sunburn that was just short of blistering. I mean, I was beet red, but it didn't blister. And it was all over my body. It was on the soles of my feet, my hairline, under my arms. I mean, like everywhere. And, my wife's like, why didn't you use sunscreen? And I'm like, we weren't out in the sun, we were in the shade. I mean, I don't know how I got this way. And they went to the hospital and had a incredible physical exam. And while I was in there, I mostly had my eyes closed because my eyes hurt so bad. They diagnosed me as having, we were both severely dehydrated. So they got 2 IVs running. And Toby's in another treatment room, so we're separated. And the base commander and the hospital commander, along with 2 guys in civilian clothes that I did not recognize, came into the treatment room and asked the doctor to excuse himself. They wanted to talk to me. Now, I was on good terms with the hospital commander. He's my boss. I mean, I had a good relationship with him. I was a good employee. And he said, Sergeant Lovelace, you're to have no contact with Sergeant Tobias in any way, shape, or form, not verbally, not in writing. You're not to give him anything. He's not to give you anything. You're not to call him or attempt to contact him through third parties. And he was very stern about it. And he says, do you understand that? That's my order. And I said, yes, sir. Now, they wanted us separated. They did not want us talking to one another. And I spent 2 nights, 3 days in the hospital. And on my second night, my last night there, is when I had the OSI come into my room. My night nurse came in and gave me an injection for pain, or was about to. And this major, he was in civilian clothes, but he flashed his ID with his OSI badge, and his rank was on his ID. And he said, if that's going to sedate Sergeant Lovelace, that's going to have to wait. We need to ask him a few questions. And then he said, and shut the door on your way out. And it was just rude the way he said it. And I thought, what's the reason for this? But I could tell these guys were cops. I mean, they just look like, I hate to stereotype people. I used to work with the police when I was a prosecutor. So, I mean, it's not like I think of them badly, but these guys had, their suit coats were open, and they had the shoulder holsters that they wore, and it was visible. You could see them. They didn't make any attempt to hide their firearm. And they kind of walked, kind of sauntered, and, they walked like they were they had authority. And the one says to me, because I piped up and I said, sir, am I in some kind of trouble? And the major looks over, and his sidekick was a younger guy, a captain, maybe in his early 30s. And he looks over at the captain, and they both laugh. And he says, and he had this weird Louisiana accent, kind of like Calvin Parker. If you've ever talked to Calvin Parker or heard Calvin.
Sure, I have. I've had him on the show. Yeah, he's an amazing man.
He is. He's a great guy. And this OSI agent said, son, would we be here if you weren't in trouble?
That's a good one.
Oh my God, what did we do? Did we burn the forest down or something?
All right. So now they put the ball in the other court. It's your problem.
It was my problem.
Wow.
And what happened was we didn't put the chain back up across the road.
Oh.
Our park rangers found it in the morning, and when they found our campsite, everything was there. We had 2 blankets that were hospital issue. We took from the hospital, intended to bring them back, of course. But our air mattresses were in the tent, and the campfire extinguished, I'm sure. And they found Toby's backpack that had his name and address in it. They could see that he was from the base. So I found out later they had called the base and said, it looks like 2 of your airmen have been down here. And they set up a camp, and it looks like they're planning on coming back because they left all their stuff. So this guy starts quizzing me. Why would you guys leave all your stuff? He says, you're planning on coming back? He said, do you have a little marijuana plot growing somewhere out there? Now that scared me. That would have been a trip to Leavenworth.
Yeah.
77 active duty. Oh my God. So I'm like, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir. And he said, well, if you don't have a big bag of marijuana in your house or in your car, you wouldn't mind if I took a look, would you? And I thought, shouldn't you get a warrant or something? But I didn't say that. I thought, if I protest, I didn't know. I was 22. Didn't have the life experience or benefit of a law degree. I didn't know. And I said, I thought that if I protested, I'd look guilty. So I said, sure, no problem. So I signed a bunch of consents. Now, I can hardly see. I can't read these things because of my eyes. They had kept the lights turned off in my room because my eyes were so sensitive. And as soon as that nurse shut the door, guy turned on the overhead lights. And I'm like, sir, could you turn those out? That really hurts my eyes, please. And he says, no, got to see what we're doing, son. That Calvin Parker thing going on. And they did this. They ended their interrogation, which was pretty much just an intimidation exercise. When I look back at it in retrospect, it was to intimidate me, and they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. I was thoroughly intimidated, and the captain leaves and shuts the door behind him. And the head of my bed was near the door. It was a small room, and he put his hand on the door so that he'd feel somebody trying to come in. And he got down right next to my face, and he said, son, I know, and you 2 knuckleheads stumbled onto something out there, and I think you know what I'm talking about. And I didn't answer him. I didn't know how to answer him. I knew I wasn't going to tell him I saw a UFO the size of Walmart. I knew I'd be in a psych ward.
A super Walmart even.
Oh, a super Walmart, absolutely. Yeah. So he says, yeah, I think you know what I mean. And he says, all I want to know is how many pictures of it did you take? And I want your camera and your film. So they must have known, they had to know that this thing was there. Their concern was that I had taken, 36 exposures of it and I was going to send it to the National Enquirer or something. God, I wish I had, And it's crazy while we're watching this thing, and I think this speaks to how they can control your mindset. The thought of taking a photograph of this thing never crossed either one of our minds. Never. There's
a lot of adrenaline. People use that as some sort of, argument, that you didn't have that experience, but there's a lot going on in your head. I have a quote I can't even quote myself on my own quote, but on my Facebook page regarding that, which makes a lot of sense, but there's a lot going on in your head, and that adrenaline makes, the point was, fleeing and fighting and those are the first things that come to your mind.
Yeah.
Or to your nervous system.
I think that's right. Well, that ties in with that feeling of sedation too.
Yeah.
That I had. And I certainly wouldn't have wanted to use a camera with a flash while those things were walking around in the meadow.
Well, that's the other thing too. And the feeling that I had, I don't want to do anything to attract attention right now. I don't want to move. I don't want to breathe. I don't want to, that was my thought. And so I'm just going to ride it out. And it's who's going to make the first move. So I likened it to a Mexican standoff, and it was frightening.
We had very similar emotions. I remember thinking, like I said, I had this canvas over my head that provided me cover, I was hidden. And we were both just on our knees looking out and just scared to death. And my friend's starting to hyperventilate. And I'm like, man, you got to get control of your breathing. And yeah, we were just afraid that we were going to draw attention to ourselves. So
I had a neighbor buddy who, even as little kids, I felt that he would overreact to situations, to fear and things that we did as kids. And, you know, I always wondered what that came from. And, you know, it was later on, I realized that we had some of the same experiences, but I don't know. I always thought they struck him a different way and caused him to panic in situations that were not worth panicking over. So, you know, not that my reactions were much better, but, you know, as a kid, you know, kids react in different ways. And, again, going back to this notion that everybody has these different experiences. And, you know, some people see things differently. Some people feel things differently. And why is that? That's what I want to know. One of the many questions.
Yeah, you know, there was something. Toby and I worked together for a couple of years, and we were best of friends. I mean, on our off time, we'd, you know, often play cards or barbecue. Our wives were friends. And something changed. I can't reconcile it, but I left that park thinking, you know, I was sick of the guy. I didn't want anything to do with him. So, you know, when the hospital commander said you'd have had no contact with him, I thought, that's fine with me. And that just wasn't right. You know, it just wasn't right. I mean, you know, we were friends. And I did see him before he left. They cut him orders for Japan, and he was PCS'd out of there in like weeks. So even though we had this order of no contact, I told my wife, I really want to say goodbye to Toby. And she's like, man, I wouldn't, you know, don't mess with these OSI people, Terry, you know. But I did. I stopped by his house, and there was a truck in the driveway, and they're loading it with boxes. And I kind of jog up the driveway, and I walk through the same doorway I've walked through 100 times before. And there's his wife, and she's just glaring at me. And she says, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, I know. I just want to say goodbye to Toby. I heard you guys are going to Japan. And Toby heard this exchange, and he came around the corner, and I was shocked. He was always particular about his appearance. His clothes were dirty. He had a dirty T-shirt. He was barefoot. His hair was a mess. It just struck me as odd. I'd never seen him in that kind of condition. And he walked up to me, and it was just a really odd thing. Here this guy is. He's my best friend. And, you know, I thought it would be appropriate to embrace him, but I didn't. And we managed this awkward exchange of a handshake. And he was about 6 inches shorter than I am. I'm a little over 6 foot. And he looks up at me and says, it happened, didn't it, Terry?
Yeah.
And I looked down at my shoes and I said, yes, my brother, it happened. And he said, but why us? And I said, man, I don't know. I don't have a clue. I just want to wish you well. And he reeked of vodka, which was, again, out of character. This guy would maybe drink a beer and a half at a barbecue, but I'd never known him to drink hard liquor or drink anything to excess. And I turned and I ran back to the car. I didn't look back.
What's your impression of the AFOSI, and what do you believe to be their major function? Or actually, let's just talk about then what their function was then.
Sure. OSI, for maybe if anybody doesn't know, stands for Office of Special Investigations. And the OSI is to the Air Force what NCIS is to the Navy. They're the investigative branch of the Air Force's security police. So I was told by Lou Elizondo, actually, when he came to visit me, that there were rogue elements out there, people that pretty much had their own agenda and did what they wanted. And he said that I'm hopeful that wouldn't happen to anyone today. And I said, well, I hope not.
What do you think their goal was then?
Their goal was, first and foremost, they wanted to make sure that I hadn't photographed this thing, because it was common knowledge in the hospital squadron that I was an amateur photographer. I had a new camera. I had a dark room set up to develop black and white prints in the spare bedroom of my house. And that was their main concern, that I had taken photographs of this thing. And their second thing on their agenda was they did not want Toby and I to have contact with one another. Because, two people telling the same story has a lot more credibility than one. And they just did not want that to happen. And Toby and his wife divorced. And when we were in Michigan, she reached out to my wife. They were good friends. And she had remarried, and the guy she married was a long-haul truck driver. And Tammy knew where we lived, and she said, we'd like to stop by and visit. And my wife said, sure. So she came by with her new husband, a nice guy, and came in, and we kind of sat down, and it was kind of like talk about old times. And I asked her, I said, what happened to Toby? And she says, he just fell apart. She said, after this thing happened to you guys, he just fell apart. He just fell apart. And, I remember when I went in their house to say goodbye, she gave me this real hard look. And I found out when she was in my house, she told me that Toby told her, yeah, this is all Terry's idea. So thanks, Toby.
Great idea.
Yeah. So he left the Air Force under not good circumstances. And I reached out to him, tried to talk to him. I had his father's phone number in Flint, and I called him in the early 80s a couple times and spoke to his dad, and he knew who I was. And I asked him, I said, would you please have him contact me? And left my number. And he says, next time I see him, I will. And the second time I talked to him, he said, yeah, Toby's spending a lot of time on the street. I don't know. And then the third time I called, the number was disconnected. So I wasn't able to contact him that way. But a few years later, I was working on a case that involved the FBI. And I became friends with this FBI agent. Nice guy, smart guy. And I asked him, Friday nights sometimes after we got done at the office, we'd go down and have a beer or, at the corner. And I asked him, I said, Friday night, can you join me for a beer? He said, sure. So we're having a beer, and I asked him, hey, could you find a friend for me, a guy I was in the military with? And he's like, sure. As long as the guy's not a fugitive, I can find anybody. And he says, give me everything you got on him. And I anticipated that, so I had a sheet of paper with name and dad's name and everything that I could think of about the guy, and I gave it to him, and he looked at it and said, okay, let me see what I can do for you. But he said, this is just between us. It's not an official investigation, and he made that clear. And I said, sure, I understand. I appreciate the favor. So about 2 weeks later, he calls me back, and he says, meet me again. It's Friday night. I said, sure. And he says, I got some news for you. And I knew it would be about Toby. So we got together, and he says, I got bad news for you. I'm afraid your friend is dead.
Whoa.
I'm like, he's dead? What do you mean he's dead? He said, yeah. He said, I'm sorry, Terry. It was a car accident in Flint. And he didn't survive. And he says, that kind of thing happens. And, at the time I thought, well, I guess you're right. Things like that do happen. And I trusted this guy, and because I knew FBI agents to be as people of integrity, and this guy lied to me. When I was doing the research for my book, I thought I'd look up his obit. Toby wasn't his real name, but out of deference to his family and his child, I used Tobias. So I searched for his obit, and I found it. And he was alive until 2007. September 4th, 2007. So all those years that we could have got together, wasted. He probably tried to reach out to me, and who knows why he didn't. I was fairly visible. I'd be easy to find. But that's the way it ended up. But, I came out of this thing rattled, and, I suffered some after effects from it. You were talking about, I have some peculiarities. If I'm in a mall, if there are malls anymore, I remember malls, and they have for some reason, the nude mannequins in a storefront window freak me out. Huh. They do. I mean, they'll throw me a panic attack. I'll be grabbing an Ativan because I will leave. I have to leave the store.
Right.
So, and I don't understand that, but
Did you ever, after the publication of your book, did you ever speak to anybody like Doty or Walter Bosley about AFOSI?
I spoke to two people, and they've asked me not to use their name. And the one person told me that the drug that they used was sodium amytal. And I didn't get into this, actually, but about 8 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I was summoned to the OSI office, and they sent a car for me. So driver pulled up in a blue police car, and I got in the back seat and took me to OSI headquarters and walked me down this corridor that had these little interrogation rooms on either side, and they were marked alphabetically, like A, B, C, D. And I was at the end of the hall, and on the right, I think it was E. And he opened the door with a key and said, "Have a seat. Someone will be right with you." And the door closed like a bank vault, so I didn't even try to see if the door was locked. It was obvious it was. And this room was about the size of my bathroom. It was a good-sized bathroom, but I mean, it was an interrogation room. And there was a, 1950s vintage military desk, gray, with a gray swivel chair with some padding. And in the corner, there were three of those, in the 60s and 70s, there were those fiberglass colored seats that were ubiquitous. They were, in waiting rooms and in yellow and red and green, mostly yellow. And those were in the corner. And then there was a framed mirror on the wall. And I thought, that's odd. Who would be grooming themselves during an exam? And then it hit me. It must be a two-way affair. And I wanted to go over and, cup my hands around it and see if I could peek into it, but I didn't have the nerve to do that. I sat there and waited and waited and waited. And I think that was intentional. I think they wanted me to be good and anxious, and I sure was. And the two agents came in, and I call him in my book, I refer to him as Agent Gregory, was the major. And he sat down. Well, first thing he did was kick me out of the comfortable padded chair and put me in one of those fiberglass chairs. And he took some files out of his briefcase, and he was polite. And he said, "Well, we might just close your case today. Would you like that?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I'd like that very much." He said, "Good, maybe we can do that. You're going to be hypnotized today." And I said, "No, sir, I did not know that." And I said, but why? I don't understand why. And I started to protest. And he reached into his one of these manila folders, and those forms that I signed, those consents that I signed when I was in the hospital, one of them had a caption that read, "Consent to hypnotic regression and with chemical enhancement," words to that effect. And he slams this piece of paper down in front of me, and he points to my signature and says, "Is that not your signature, son?" And I said, "Yes, sir, it is. But I would rather not." And he says, "Oh, well, that's not a problem." He says, You can withdraw your consent, son. He says, I can tear these papers up. I'll throw them in that trash can. And we'll leave, and we'll just see you at the court-martial. Now, I haven't been charged with a crime. I don't even know, other than asking for my film, I don't even know what these guys want from me. But the whole purpose of that exercise was to find out if I'd hidden some film. While we're sitting there, the two agents then ignore me, and they're chit-chatting back about golf or something. And this guy knocks on the door, and the captain opens the door, and he walks in. It's a major, kind of a big barrel-chested guy. I refer to him in the book as Brad. And he wore oak leaves, but he had no name tag on, which struck me as odd. And I thought, this must be their hypnotist, And this guy, he carried himself more like a priest or a therapist. He didn't carry himself like a military officer. And he puts out his hand. He's like, Sergeant Lovelace, it's so good to finally meet you. And I shook his hand. I said, yes, sir. Nice to meet you. And he pulled up a chair, like invading my personal space right next to me, because he kicked the Major Gregory out of the comfortable chair and took it for himself and wheeled it around. And he says, Sergeant Lovelace, for purposes of this little exercise today, would you call me Brad? That is my name. And it was just creepy.
That's odd. Yeah.
And then he says, and may I call you, just for today, may I call you Terry instead of Sergeant Lovelace? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, don't you mean yes, Brad? And I said, yes, Brad. And he told me, he says, I'm going to hypnotize you today, and I'm going to give you some medicine in your arm, and it'll make you feel relaxed. And he kind of winks at me and says, you look like a guy that has a beer now and then. I bet you'll enjoy this. A lot of people tell me it's a very pleasant experience. And I thought, you jerk, but you assume that I'm a drinker because I'm an enlisted man. I took offense to that. And then he started talking about St. Louis, and he rattles off some landmarks. And I feel like I'm starting to actually get comfortable with the guy. And then as soon as I realized that, I thought, this is the time to put my guard up. And I think he sensed that, and he shifted gears and cut off the chit-chat and proceeded to give me some medicine. He gave me an injection in the crook of my arm. He had a little like shaving kit with a piece of rubber tubing and some alcohol swabs and stuff. Gave me an injection in my arm, and it was like, bam! It was. If you've ever had IV sedation, like in preparation for a surgical procedure or something,
yeah, lights out.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of the drug is classified as a hypnotic, and I understand why they call it a hypnotic, because I was awake but barely, and I could hear him, and I'm kind of in this passive position in his chair, and he takes me through this progressive relaxation exercise. And you know what? I'm determined. I can't resist the medication, but I can resist the hypnosis. And I thought, I'm not going to give my mind to this guy. I'm going to do everything I can to passively resist. And I did. So he had me do this exercise of, you're going to, there's a stairway. You take the first step going down, feeling relaxed, feeling calm. Take that next step, Terry. Now you're feeling twice as relaxed, twice as calm, feeling warm, feeling secure. That kind of thing. He had this real smooth voice, like a radio announcer. And it was just easy to listen to the guy. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. So in my mind's eye, I'm going up the staircase, right? When he's talking and trying to progressively make me relax, I'm doing multiplication tables in my head. I'm playing Beatle music. I'm doing anything I can to not surrender my full mind to him, which was difficult because like I said, I couldn't fight the medication. And I may have been hypnotized. I don't know. I don't think that I was. I certainly wasn't fully. I know that I wouldn't have a lot of the memories of what happened to us that night had he not hypnotized me. because he called this stuff out of my subconscious, and I saw images I didn't remember. So, and I think that turned out to be a good thing, because I think that if you don't do that, and these memories are suppressed of some kind of traumatic event like this, of this scale, and you repress that and it's in your head, I think it can manifest in unhealthy ways, alcohol abuse or mental illness, or come out some kind of way that's not healthy. So when he was confident that I was under, because the captain whispered to him, "Is he under?" And he says, "Oh yeah, piece of cake. He was gone by the time I counted 3." And I thought, "You jerk," Yeah. He asked me, he said, "Terry, I want you to tell me what you see. Don't tell me what you think. I want you to go back. Go back to the Devil's Den. Go back to the plateau. Go back to being inside the craft and tell me what you see." No, he didn't say that first. He said, "Tell me what you see. Don't tell me what you think." And I said, "Yes, Brad." And he said, "You guys saw some funny lights in the sky, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, Brad." And I could see him in my mind's eye. I mean, that was a conscious memory, right? And he said, "But those weren't stars at all, were they, Terry?" And I said, "No, Brad, I don't think they were." And he says, "Who were they, Terry?" And I said, "They're the space people." And I was shocked. I mean, I couldn't believe that came out of my mouth. And I had memories then. As I said, I've never had a clear linear memory of everything that happened to us. I just have a couple of bits and pieces, little vignettes of things that we experienced. And that's all. That's enough. And he asked me, he said, he asked me to describe the inside of the ship, which I did. And, it was a funny thing. This thing looked like a Walmart. I think I told you, or a super Walmart, or it was huge. But the inside of the thing, now I don't know if they took us somewhere else. Maybe we weren't inside that thing. Maybe we were somewhere else, because the inside of this thing was as big as like a football stadium. And it was just tall. I mean, it was just incredibly big on the inside. And again, I don't know if that was that ship or someplace else. I have no idea. Everything was like stainless steel or white porcelain. There was a gray moving sidewalk. I know that because, I'll tell you in a minute. But and I could see parked on the side, on the left side, there were 3 flying saucers parked. They were lined up against the wall like planes under a carrier deck. And Calvin and I talked about this. The only thing I could move was my eyes. And my eyes are darting around, and I'm trying to drink in everything. And I'm thinking, I got to remember this. I got to remember this. And I'm also thinking, well, I hope they turn me loose. I hope they don't hurt me. And I have a memory of a woman screaming. And then I was aware that my buddy who was next to me was gone. They had undressed us, and we were both standing next to each other. As I said, we were frozen, couldn't move anything but our eyes. And I'm holding my clothing and my boots in my hand, and Toby's doing the same. And then I'm aware that he's not there. And then I heard him scream, oh my God, no. And then a scream. I mean, he was in pain. They were hurting him. And I'm just scared to death. And I looked to my right, and there were other human beings in this thing. Anywhere from 12 to 20. I mean, I couldn't count them because I didn't have, I couldn't turn my head to completely look at them. I only see them through my peripheral vision. But we were off to the side. We were segregated from them. And I felt that was a good thing. And these people they weren't men. They were a mixed bag of men, women, and children. And they were all frozen like us. And their eyes are darting all over the place. And they're all crying. And I just thought, man, where am I? And then it must have been my turn because I remember going down a hallway on a moving sidewalk, and I'm like, like a mannequin or something. I can't move. And we went down the long hallway, and out of my peripheral vision to the right, there was a wall of what looked like fish tanks in varying sizes. And in a couple, there was this pink water, or of some kind, and these things that looked like puppies. I thought they were puppies. You know how puppies, when they're first born, have the folds of skin all over?
Yeah.
That's what these things kind of look like. And they took us. I was in this white domed room, and these gray guys put me on this porcelain table. And I remember thinking, this thing's not cold. And then I thought, yeah, it's not cold because, I'm probably the 10th body in a row that's been lying here. And at the foot of the thing, there was this insectoid. This thing looked like a praying mantis. Now, I swear, I picture this thing as wearing a white lab coat. But I'm sure there's no way this thing was wearing a white lab coat. But I got this medical vibe from him. And I really wasn't. I was worried about him hurting me more than I was being afraid of his appearance. And I remember I'm filling my lungs with as much air as I can, and I'm screaming because he's starting to do something to my lower back, and it hurt. It hurt a lot. And I'm screaming, and I can't hear anything. And I'm thinking, how does that work? And I keep screaming. And evidently I annoyed Dr. Bug here, because and this thing is like 7 foot tall, and it turns this big green bulbous head in my direction and looks at me with its left eye looking down. And I heard this thing in my head as crystal clear as any spoken word I've ever heard. And it said, "Why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back. Now stop screaming." And he tapped me on the head, and I was out. And they dumped both of us by our car. And then I was barely conscious. I don't know Toby's condition. But they dumped me by the car. And I thought, boy, these guys screwed up. They should have taken us inside the tent. And then pretty soon, these little gray guys, I have a theory about them, by the way, I'll tell you. Little gray guys come, and they dragged us and kind of unceremoniously threw us into the tent. And I have a feeling that's probably who redressed us. That's why my socks were on sideways and my boots were on so unlaced. And I barely remember them throwing me in. And then I was out again for some period of time. I don't know how long. And, that's when I woke up to the flashing lights. So Brad, the hypnotist, pulls all this out of my subconscious, and I tell him everything I remember. And then I could tell we're getting towards the end, because this sodium mannitol, or whatever it was, is short acting. So he had to give me several doses of it. And he asked me, he says, "Now, Terry, this is very important. You told these 2 agents here, when you talked to them when you were in the hospital, you told them that you didn't take any pictures. Is that true, Terry? Were you truthful with those agents?" And I said, "Yes, Brad." And he said, "And you never took a photograph?" I said, "No, sir. No, Brad. No, never took a photograph," which is true. It was the truth. So then he progressively walked me back up the stairs and told me I could stretch, and that felt good. And I thought I'd been under for an hour maybe, and it was more like 3. And I come and I kind of get my wits about me, and Brad had a glass of water for me, and I drank some water, and I'm kind of shaking this off, and I get my wits about me. And Brad leaves, the hypnotist, doesn't say, I thought it was odd he didn't say, goodbye or nice to meet you, see you later, he just left. And so I'm there with these 2 agents. And Gregory, the one in charge, says, "Well, we're going to close your file today." So he said, "But, you don't need to be telling people about any of this stuff. I don't know what you remember," but he said, "Whatever you remember, I'd forget about it. You understand?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he says, "You're free to go." And I left, and there was a driver waiting for me, same guy, and he took me home. Major Gregory said, he says, "I cleared it with your boss. You can go home and take the rest of the day off." I said, "Great, thanks. I appreciate that." And that was it. And then, October 25th of 1979, my enlistment ended, and I separated from the Air Force and finished my undergrad degree in psychology and went to law school at Michigan.
Amazing. And we don't have a lot of time, but the Implant, we need to go back and revisit that. Is it still there?
No, there's a weird story about the Implant. I wish we had 30 more minutes. This is detailed in my book, because there's more detail that goes into it than we have time for. So I'll make it an abbreviated version,
sure.
And it won't make a lot of sense. But in October, third week in October 2017, I'm working on my book, right? And almost done with it. And I woke up in my living room. And I thought, that's odd. And I've never sleepwalked, not one time in my life. And seated directly across from me is this woman that I first took to be a petite Asian woman. And she's wearing black, like a black pantsuit, black shoes, like sturdy black nursing shoes with a heel to give her some height. Extra long sleeve. She had those long black fingers. She was not a human being. I mean, if she walked down the streets of Houston, she probably wouldn't draw a second look. But I'm looking at her pretty close because she's in my living room. And I have that same feeling of sedation. I'm calm. I glance over. I see the alarm is still set. My cat's in the corner sleeping. And I thought I could scream for my wife, but I bet she's not going to hear me. They probably got that covered. And this woman, this thing, had on this wig, and it was all askew. It was sideways. And the reason for that is that she had the back of her skull was bulbous. It was huge. And the wig that she was wearing was obviously meant for a human head, not hers. So this wig just kind of sat funny on top. And she never told me her name. I referred to her in my book as Betty, because I know it sounds crazy, but she reminded me of Betty Rubble from the Flintstones with this black hair. So she spoke to me telepathically, like Dr. Bug did. And I realized that we were communicating telepathically, and it felt perfectly fine. And then I thought, what if I think the wrong thing? What if I think something that makes her mad? What if I think of anything inappropriate? Well, you get a bunch of fourth graders and you tell them don't think about elephants, and what are they going to do? They're going to think about elephants. And looking back at it, this is almost kind of funny. I had all these inappropriate things run through my mind, and she looked at me kind of puzzled, and she says, "Terry, you can keep some of your thoughts private if you try." Now, I don't know if she just said that for my benefit or what, but I tried. And I could see why we don't, as human beings, communicate telepathically, because it takes discipline. And she told me, and I said, I asked, "Why are you here? Why are you in my living room?" And before she could answer, I had the thought, does this have something to do with these things in my leg? And she nodded her head and fired back yes. And I was going to try to get the thing down by my knee removed. I was going to actually see, because I had a heart attack in 2005, and I had in 2011, I had a stent put in my heart. I talked to a bunch of surgeons, both at the VA and out of my pocket. I paid to talk to private surgeons because I wanted them to take me out, take this thing out and put it in my hand. Well, the surgeons, when they saw the x-rays, were thrilled. They thought, cool, yeah, we'll take this out for you, no problem, every one of them. And they said, we need your medical history. And they said, I see, you've had a heart attack. I need a cardiac clearance letter. And I said, okay, so you need a letter from my cardiologist saying it's cool that I have the surgery. And he said, yeah. He said, that's standard of care. I need that. Well, no cardiologist would give me a cardiac clearance letter. That's why I didn't have the thing removed, because I wanted it out of my body immediately. But I was told and verified that the standard of care is, there's 500,000 veterans walking around out there with shrapnel in their bodies that they probably would like to have removed. But if it's not bothering them, it's a risk-benefit analysis, and there are risks that go with surgery. And if these things are benign, let them lie. So I could not get a surgeon in the States to touch me. So I was in the middle of working with this clinic in Mexico. I was going to go to Mexico and have it removed. And she knew that. And she said, if you proceed with your plans to have this thing removed, she referred to them as her hosts. She said, you called them aliens, I called them my hosts, which I thought was an odd word. It has several different connotations. I mean, it can be a verb, it can be a noun, but just odd. And she said, the thing that's in your leg can't, because I asked her, I said, what purpose does this serve? And she wouldn't answer my question. She said, it serves many purposes. Just would not, she wasn't taking questions. And she said the aliens would not let this thing fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists. She said, if you proceed with your plans to have it removed, my hosts will come and remove it in the middle of the night while you're sleeping. And I thought, okay. And that was about it. And to cut to the chase here, I woke up the next morning and I thought, man, that was real. And I grabbed my notebook and I wrote down everything that I could remember. Part of the reason I had such a good memory about this is I was in the habit of journaling, and everything that happened to me while I was in the Air Force, the experience with this thing, I drew a picture of the craft. I journaled in notebooks, and that came in handy when I sat down to write the book. But I woke up November 17th, 2017, about 3 weeks after this woman visited me, and I woke up and I'm in pain, and I got pain at the top of both of my legs. And I woke up and it hurt so bad I can hardly move. And I didn't see the bruises until the following day. It didn't bruise until the next day. But I had these puncture wounds. They weren't bleeding, but they were distinct puncture wounds at the top. They weren't at the bottom of my leg where my knee is, but they were at the top of my leg. So, but I don't know how far up those wires went. So maybe they pulled it out that way. But I can tell you, it hurt. I was in a lot of pain. I told my wife, I said, I think they came and they took that thing out of my leg. And she says, well, go get an x-ray. I'm like, good idea. So you can't get an x-ray on demand. I mean, you can't walk into an imaging center and say, I need an x-ray. They want something from a doctor. So I had the x-rays copied onto copy paper, and I had them both with me. And I went to this chiropractor's office because I thought, chiropractors can get me an x-ray and it'd probably be a lot less hassle. And I waited. I didn't have an appointment. I waited to see this guy for like 40 minutes. And he finally calls me back and he says, okay, where do you hurt? And I said, well, at the top of my legs here. And he says, well, let me see. And I pull my pants down and he says, well, how did you get these puncture wounds? And I said, well, I pulled my pants back up and I said, sir, doctor, in the middle of the night, I think that aliens came and took an implant out of my leg. And he's like, okay. And he's got me by the elbow and he's like, there's no charge for today. And he's walking me to the front door because he thinks I'm crazy. And I'm holding these images up in front of his face because I know chiropractors look at 100 x-rays a day. And he saw this thing and he stopped in his tracks and he looks at both of them and says, come on into my office. So we went into his office. He shut the door. His phone's ringing. People are knocking at the door. And he says, tell me how you got this. Give me the quick version. And I did. And he said, okay. He says, and he wrote me a script for an x-ray. He says, I'll pay for your x-ray, but I want to see it. And he says, because I told him I was writing a book. And he says, but under the condition that you don't use my name or the name of my clinic. And I said, no, I promise I won't do that. So I've got the x-rays here, dated, November 17, 2017. And sure enough, they took that thing out that looked like a transistor, looked like an electrical device of some kind. That was gone. And I didn't see anything else. And I dropped the x-rays off at his office. And he called me and he says, well, did you see that what they left you? And I said, no, I didn't see anything at all. And he says, well, swing by and get the x-rays. And I want you to look at them. And he says, look right in the middle of your femur. Lying parallel to your femur, there are two tiny wires that run parallel to one another. And they're about a half an inch long. And I'm like, hey, doc, if these things are so far evolved, why would they be so inept as to leave these wires in my body? And I love his answer. He says, they don't make mistakes. He says, all they did was give you an upgrade. They took out their 1977 model and put in a 2017 model, and that's what you have in your leg now.
Very interesting. Wow. But that makes sense, I mean, we think of their own technology probably evolves faster than they can even imagine, just like we think of ours. So yeah, that's, my gosh, that's something to think about right there. Yeah. So if their technology evolves, how would I even say this? In 50 years, we've changed so much, in 50 minutes, they could change so much. Who knows? Something to think about.
Exponentially, they change. They're 500
exponentially
up the evolutionary ladder from us. Yeah, they are.
To exponential evolution, just super fast. So what's next for you? I mean, this book's amazing, and I want to finish reading that and then move on to the next one. But what are you thinking? Where do you want to be a year from now?
What I'm doing, it's important to me to tell people about this. And not because I want to sell books. I don't need to sell books, to be honest with you. But I think what happened to me is important that people know, and they know that it's real. And I kind of see that as a mission. And I go to every conference I can go to, UFO Congress and Contact in the Desert and, Eureka Springs maybe in July, if it still goes. I doubt that it will.
Yeah, I hope we got some of those coming up this summer.
And I go and I speak and I tell the story and, people are amazed. And a few people come up to me and said, oh, I don't believe you. And I'm like, well, that's your right. I mean, I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm just objectively telling you without embellishment what happened to me. And, take from it what you will.
You got a fantastic website with photographs, and what's really unique about your website, it's so complete. It has your biography and as well as your story. Tell everybody where they can find that, because it's a great place to visit what you're about. Yes, it's easy. It's terrylovelace.com. TerryLovelace, terrylovelace.com. And I'm also on Facebook under Incident at Devil's Den, which is the name of the book. So hit me up on Facebook, Incident at Devil's Den, or you can go to Terry Lovelace if you can get the right one, and there's a link there that'll take you over to the site. Then visit me there. Shoot me an email if you've got a question. I'm happy to talk to you, answer every and all questions. So yeah, it's a great website, very well done, by the way. I appreciate that when I look for information about somebody and find something like this. It's very spectacular, and also remember the book and Incident at Devil's Den, and available on Amazon. Yes, available. I have it as a book that has the photographs in the back, and there's a Kindle version. And then I did an audio book where I read the book in my own
voice, so I don't have a great radio voice, but I wanted it to be in my own words. So it's available as an audiobook too.
Yeah, ultimately that's pretty powerful, especially a way to remember you, to hear that voice, and it gives people a better feeling about what it was like to be you at that time. And I think it's an amazing thing to experience, and an amazing night as well. And I appreciate it so much. And Terry Lovelace, take good care of yourself. And, we're in for a long haul, but I think it's beneficial for us to realize that there's more to us than we realize, and it's time to reach out. And, sir, I want to thank you very much. And thank you so much for your service.
Well, thank you, Cam. I appreciate that. I'll drop by sometime.
Come to Montana. You always have a friend in Montana. Good night, sir.
Remember that. Good night.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.